Today on Locked On Dolphins, it's Power to the Pod. Our fan mailbag episode is back, and we're tackling all of your most pressing questions this summer about your Miami Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, it's Power to the Pod. The power is in the pod, the podcast, the pod at Dolphins. It's in your hands. Fan mailbag episode. And we got some great questions lined up. And want to kind of work through as many as we possibly can. We got things like Jaelan Phillips and his future with the team. The David Long candidate for 2025, who are we concerned about with a regression. Also looking at what possibly Bobby Slowick is bringing to this offense, fit for free agent corners that have been affiliated with the team, whole bunch. So let's start with this one, which comes from RTDB, which I believe stands for Run the Expletive Ball. What's your final take it or leave it offer to Jaelan Phillips if he bounces back this season? Are you willing to let him test the free agent market and take the comp pick if it is robust? I touched on this a little bit for A to Z Sports, and Phillips was one of the players that got identified as 5 Miami Dolphins who may be playing their final snaps for the team in 2025. And I've done this for almost a quarter of the league at this point. I think I've done 6 or 7 of this series, and really interesting to see what kinds of players and what kind of cost risk, what kind of injury risk, what kind of age risk, and what kind of talent is available for teams across the league. And for Miami, both Bradley Chubb and Jaelan Phillips made the list, where Bradley Chubb missed all of last year, took the pay cut to stay with the team. Phillips on a 5th-year option, but he's on a rookie deal, so obviously there was not a lot of finagling to be done there. I think the return of Jaelan Phillips is dependent upon what also simultaneously happens with Bradley Chubb. Because I have a hard time envisioning, Bradley Chubb, remember, is under contract beyond this season. And his reallocated funds were really only adjusting the cash schedule for 2025. And there's some incentives, and then there's some future. If he's on the roster, he can get some more of that money back, but he's got to go out and earn it and play it. And if I'm going to get a deal done with Jaelan Phillips, and this is assuming he stays healthy and plays this year, and I absolutely want Jaelan Phillips as a member of this locker room and a member of this football team. And I think there's very little the question of the talent that Jaelan Phillips has. I think it has to come in tandem with a transition from Bradley Chubb. Now, you should have some flexibility as far as what timeline you have to make that decision, because you could, in theory, post June 1st, designate Bradley Chubb if you were going to move on from him and then let Phillips get into the legal tampering window, or you could work on a negotiation there. But I would point to a similar name from a draft pedigree and what he has done after being a top draft choice and dealing with some levels of injuries and missing time. I'm thinking about Chase Young. Chase Young had an ACL in 2021. He missed weeks 11 through 18 and then missed weeks 1 through 11 in 2022, the following year. Chase Young played on his rookie contract. He did not have his 5th-year option exercised. And then he signed in New Orleans this past year on a 1-year, $13 million contract to sign with New Orleans. And he obviously changed teams. I think that's, for me, the kind of offer, something similar on a shorter term deal. Like, I would not offer Jaelan Phillips a 4-year contract with 2.5 years worth of that salary guaranteed. With no matter what Jaylen does this year, if Jaylen plays all 17 games and has 17 sacks, maybe he doesn't want to take a 1-year offer. But that would be my approach to the negotiations, or it would be a 3-year contract with 1 year fully guaranteed. The second year guarantees on the third day of the league calendar year the following year, so it guarantees as you go. There's a couple different ways that I think you could approach that I think would make sense for Jaylen's situation. But that's assuming he doesn't have that crazy breakout. If he has a crazy breakout, he might price himself out. But that's the kind of psychology I would have with Jaelan Phillips. Is I'd be looking on a 1-year basis and give him an opportunity to do it again, and then go into the market with a couple of years of healthy, solid production. Or alternatively, that's when I would commit the bigger money and financial commitments to Jaelan Phillips. This one comes from Diesel26. When are you inventing a time machine so we could fast forward to the start of training? I would settle for any roster transaction right now. I don't even need training camp. I could get 3 days of content out of a single roster transaction, whether that's Ramsey going out, whether that's a corner coming in, whether that's a contract extension for Jonnu Smith. I promise you, we get any kind of transaction, we're going to get a couple days of content out of it and take it from all angles. His real question is, in light of Tyreek Hill's comments at Fanatics Fest, there's absolutely 100% no possible way that Jalen Ramsey and the Dolphins patch things up right, because I'm just saying from a football perspective, it would be better for him to be on the field for the Dolphins. I agree with one piece of this, and that it's from a talent perspective, you're a more talented team with Jalen Ramsey on the roster. And I've learned by now to never be completely dismissive and never say never, but I would say it's like 99.99% certain that this bridge is burned and that Jalen Ramsey is going to be elsewhere, and that Tyreek Hill is just talking and flapping gums with a microphone in front of his face. For things that you've kind of heard behind the scenes, things that have been brought and teased into the public light, how some other players have talked about last year versus this year. I just think we're past that point. And never say never, but I would be stunned, completely floored and flabbergasted if they figured it out. And I think they can be a better team in the sense of all players working in the same direction, being committed to the same vision, caring about their business the same way, without Jalen Ramsey, while being a less talented secondary and a less talented football team and a less talented roster because Jalen Ramsey's not here. Because this is not a talent, even in Ramsey is into the back 9 of his playing career. This is not a talent issue, and you will be less talented. But I don't believe just because you're less talented, it means you're worse if the chemistry of all of the players that are executing the vision of the coaches and those players who are the conduit between the messaging of the coaches and the players and how they execute on the field, if that chemistry is better, I think it can be better from a football product standpoint, even if you're less talented. Hope that makes sense. Some more questions coming your way next here, Locked on Dolphins. We got lots more to get into. Make sure you guys stick with us. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them for yourselves. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to get Regression Ready. Regression Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that could take hours, Regea's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in just 15 minutes, effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options have not worked for you, Regression might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Regression.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's Regression, ReshapeIT.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved, and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiat website for full safety information. Shot for Schultz, he wants to know what I'm most excited about for the 2025 Miami Dolphins. And I got accused of peddling hopium for saying I was excited. I'm excited about a lot for this season, and it's individual player development. It's a more high resolution clarity on what the future, like you're at a fork in the road, and whether the season goes poorly or the season goes well, I'm excited to have the clarity to know you've pushed up to this fork in the road. You're going to have this season play out, and most likely you're going to commit to a path. And I'm excited for the clarity to know not just what, hey, 2025 is kind of a pivot year. We could go this way or we can go that way. And knowing, hey, your vision and realizing what the next team life cycle looks like is going to be rooted in some of the decisions that you make after you get the clarity of this season with new players in elevated roles and foundational players that are in place. And young players with player development and what all that looks like. That's the kind of stuff that I'm excited for. I think there's some storylines schematically about adjustments and recalibration of the offensive side of the ball and investments at offensive guard and what that looks like, and the new swing tackle in Larry Borum and what his strengths are relative to what Kendall Lamb's strengths were as a pass protector and what that means for the run game with the young players in the running game like Jaylen Wright, and how do you get balanced and what does that look like? And if the wheels just completely fall off the bus, then you say, okay, it's time to take this thing to the wood chipper and, selectively pick a handful of cornerstone pieces to hang on to and start over. But I think it will come to that? I don't pretend to know, and there's a reason I haven't done a record projection just yet, because I want to see what the rest of this roster looks like. I want to know what they get for Jalen Ramsey. I want to know if they're going to get a player back for Jalen Ramsey, if they're just going to get a pick. I want to know what corner they sign in free agency. I want to know if they get any more depth on the offensive line. Kind of just wait until training camp to see, like, something's got to give. And the whole league's kind of waiting on this saga to play itself out. Dan wants to know if Rasul Douglas is actually a good fit for this defense based on his play over the last couple of seasons. Here's what I would say about Rasul Douglas at this stage of his career. If you're going to leave him on an island and play a lot of man free, so you're playing man coverage with a single high free safety over the top, you're probably going to have some hold your breath type moments. It's the one element for Rasul where his ability to transition and flip his hips and turn and run and to carry speed vertically down the field, it's not a great matchup for him at this stage of his career. But he's a great tackler. He's a great support player. For a team like the Dolphins that likes to do a bunch of inverts in coverage and safety and secondary rotations, and you're going to push your safeties to your corners that are pressed up to play deep half, but then you're going to play Tampa 2. Then you're going to play some press man, but with safeties over the top. I think the experience could be a very valuable addition. And I think for run support, where if you're going to get into, regardless of what the front is, no matter whether you're going to get 12 personnel, whether you're going to get 11 personnel, whether you're going to get 21 personnel, depending on, is it a closed formation where the tight end's the last man in the line of scrimmage, and then the corner's got to be able to insert and play the run. Rasul does that kind of stuff really well. He's a technical, cerebral football player who just athletically, his prime is behind him, and he never really had the strength of being like a Blazer on the outside. So I think those elements project favorably. It's a question of how healthy does he stay? Do any of the young guys emerge as the season rolls on, as they continue to pick his brain? Those are all storylines that, again, like, Hopium peddler Kyle. I'm excited to see what that looks like. I'm not because I'm not living and breathing and dying with wins and losses, even though you play to win the game. And I want them to win football games. But like if I take the 30,000 foot view, there's a lot of those individual storylines that like I want to know what Cam Smith does. I want to know what Jason Marshall looks like. I'm not super excited about the prospect of what Cam Smith is going to look like, but I'm excited to find out. Right? Harvard Fin fan. What is the short and long-term strategies to bolster the secondary? I know there's some optimism for the team with the current DB room to perform capably, but I saw that movie with regards to the interior offensive line play last year, and it was not good. So I think this is a good point. You have to get your internal evaluations right. And the internal evaluations that the Dolphins made last year with their interior offensive line, whether it was Isaiah Wynn and his recovery from the injury, whether it was letting Rob Hunt walk and the replacement window and what that looked like, whether that was Rob Jones and Lee Meichenberg being capable to step into starting, they got every decision wrong that they possibly could with that group last year. And I think it really gave you a limited menu on what kind of football you could play last year. That's why you see the metrics about the Dolphins were tied for the worst stuff rate on 3rd and 1 and 2 yards at 44%. You saw the Dolphins were amongst the worst teams in the league in explosive play rate. They didn't hold the ball, right? His screen rate. Once Austin Jackson went down, I mean, you're playing with replacement level players at both stops inside. You thought they were going to take a leap, and they didn't. So I think you have more proof of concept that Kader Kohu is ready. But the rest of the group right now, you have to get the internal evaluations right. And I think if I was going to sell you on why I think it could be right beyond the front being better, Anthony Weaver helped make those assessments with defensive tackle last year with a really shotgun shell approach as far as how many bodies they threw at the position. And I think they're doing the same in the secondary now. And Weaver, generally speaking, I think they did an okay job. No, they didn't crush it and knock it out of the park, but it was with limited resources and limited assets invested into the room. But it was anchored by a veteran summer signing in Calais Campbell that we're waiting for the Dolphins to have that same thing happen this year in the secondary. John, out of the draft picks of last year, who do you think breaks out the most on each side of the ball due to familiarity, as this is the first time we have had continuity with the coaches on both sides of the football? This is a really good question. I'm kind of expecting a big year from Jaylen Wright. I think you saw the flashes last year. I think his ability to execute the reads was stressed by the execution of both the skill players blocking on the perimeter and the play between the tackles with the guards and the guard play and what that looked like. So I think he should have some clearer pictures to make his reads. And obviously he has a year in the system and experience to feel how to press the line of scrimmage and when to cut and when not to cut and so on and so forth. So I think for me personally, Jaylen Wright from last year's draft class is the breakout that I look at in that regard. Defensively, I think I'm going to lean into Chop, where Chop had a great back half of the season. But I mean, Teron Armstead just went on Good Morning Football and said, he reminds me of Von Miller. I wouldn't be surprised if he led the league in sacks at someday. Maybe not this year, but someday. And I can't often recall a player whose switch so dramatically flipped because you were through like the Arizona game last year and I was really frustrated with Chop. And I don't know what happened like that week, but from that point onward, he felt like a totally different player. And having that momentum going into the offseason with the physical talent that he has and seeing how we've perceived the light bulb to come on, I think Chop's in for a big, big, big season. Now, we have many more questions here on Power of the Pod. I don't know that I'm going to get them all in, but we're going to try our best, which means we got a boogie. So I'm going to be right back after a quick break. Talk to you all in a minute. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control of your finances. Because Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you can start building your wealth. For me personally, it was the micro transactions each day throughout the month that were adding up. And when you see it all laid out the way that Monarch can, it really opens your eyes and you make some adjustments and you can feel good about your financial plan moving forward. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Peter wants to know, do you have someone on David Long watch? Someone who performed well last year or in years prior, who you feel is primed for a potentially large drop-off? I think about who played well last year. I think the obvious low-hanging fruit option for like a player who disproportionately outperformed their career averages would be Jonnu Smith. And I know somebody, was it Dan? Yeah, Dan asked in your deep dive on Touchdown Miami of how the Dolphins utilize their tight ends and 11 personnel. Does that change your thoughts on whether Jonnu is worth increased financial investment? Jonnu is who he is. I think the only question that they have with Jonnu is if this season doesn't go well, and now you're looking at an age 31 tight end next year on a extended contract, if you make systemic changes, if you make a head coach change, you make an offensive scheme change as a result, is Jonnu, who's a great fit for the pass game roles within this offense, is that a player you're going to want on a bigger money contract if you make those pivots in leadership and scheme on the offensive side of the ball? I think that's the only question. And I don't think Jonnu's going to have a David Long type regression. I would guess Jonnu doesn't repeat rewriting the entirety of the tight end record book. But I do think that Jonnu has a firm and established role in certain down and distance game situations. The challenge for Miami, especially when they get into their 11 personnel stuff, is you don't have a player who blurs the lines. Your Jonnu package is by and large a RPO and passing game package, where maybe you get a favorable look, you hand the ball off. But they're not putting him to the formational, so they're putting him on the backside of the strength, and they're running away from Jonnu Smith. And then it's Julian Hill, and Julian Hill comes in, and they're putting Julian in motion, and they're running behind Julian, or they're putting him in line, and they're running to that side. Or maybe they'll roll the safety down, and you gotta flip it at the line of scrimmage and run it away. But that was the design call, was to run behind him. That's the challenge with the tight ends that you have. But I think he's due for regression. I don't think he's due for David Long. This is some of the worst linebacker play I've seen any linebacker play this season type of tape, which is what you had with David last year. Awesomeness. I know corner is a big problem, but we're just rolling with Ashton Davis at safety without panicking, ? I have pretty good amount of confidence that one of the young guys at safety is going to emerge at some point this season, whether it's McMorris or whether it's Trader. And if you told me that both of those guys eventually, and part of this is just they're safeties who don't run fast. And safeties who don't run fast, they don't get drafted very high. And That's the element of both of those guys. So they tackle well, they're cerebral and smart, but they don't have man coverage appeal, but they can play the run, they can step downhill, and they can play half field coverage because your landmarks aren't stretched and you're not stressed in that regard. I don't know when it will happen, and Davis is the true kind of high post type of player with some good ball production. But one of my hot takes that's developing is either McMorris or Trader, I think will be a starter by the end of the season, is a take that I have at safety. So to start, Ashton will have the chance to hold serve there. But I kind of predictively, in watching those other two guys, would not be surprised if there's a transition at some point to get the younger guys out on the field as they get acclimated to Weaver's defense. Pikachu Master. If this offense evolves like we hope, who would be beneficial to have more receiving stats and why? Jonnu Smith or DeVon Achane? I'm going to say Achane. And the reason why is we just got done talking about when the Dolphins go into 11 personnel and it's the Jonnu Smith package, you get a really limited menu for what you can do to run the football. I think one of the ways that you can circumvent that is to go back to pony personnel, which is 2 backs and 1 tight end. But the 2 backs is not a running back and a fullback, right? That's traditional 21. The pony is 2 running backs on the field at the same time. And one of those players is DeVon Achane. With what he can do in the passing game, you've improved the interior offensive line, right? If you have the tight end player as the non-passing game threat, but you have DeVon Achane plus another back on the field, that gives you passing appeal in addition to running appeal because you have the tight end who can block and then the core 5 up front. So you could put Achane and Jaylen Wright hypothetically in the backfield, and then you can motion Achane out, and then you can still have your inside zone or your outside zone or your 18-19 support or whatever it looks like, depending on what the wide receivers are doing on any given play. And you can run your full menu of run game, but then have Achane who can be moved and motioned out and be more dangerous to run the ball, and then have Achane as the pass catching element in addition to having potentially Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle or potentially Nick Westbrook-Akine and one of those 2 receivers on the field at the same time. So I think Achane gives you a better menu to be more ambiguous, even if he's not going to take the full workload of carrying the football as heavy as he did last year. We got time for 2 more. Let's see. Fantastic. Is there a correlation between multiple starters on rookie contracts and making a championship game, or the more rookies, the better? Or is that a formula to a high pick instead? I don't have any formal data on this, but I do have my personal beliefs. And I think you look at what the Rams did the last 2 seasons, where they won 10 games in each of the last 2 years through their youth movement. They won the Super Bowl, and then the bottom fell out, and they went 5-12. And McVay gave up play calling for a stretch, and it was an abject disaster. And then they offloaded big contracts, and they went through a youth movement, and they had as many or more mid-round and late-round draft picks and UDFAs make the roster in 2023 than any team in recent memory, for my money. But they got them in-house, and they developed the program, and those guys bought into the system, and they started slow, and then they finished strong, and they won 10 games, and they give the Detroit Lions all they could have in the playoffs. And then they, the following year, won 10 games again. They had some injuries up front on the offensive line, so they started a little slow. They finished 10-7. They win the NFC West. They take the Eagles and put them on the ropes. And you take all that and you look at all that young talent that they allocated. They have hardly any expiring contracts on the defensive side of the ball this year. This is year 3 of the transition. So they go about their business on offense. They selectively find some veterans to bring back in, but they have the nucleus because they went en masse and embraced, we need to restock the pond, if you will. And I think that's the chapter that the Dolphins are maybe in a little bit right now, as we bid farewell to some of the prior big fish and restock the pond. And now it's a matter of overachieving slimmer expectations. And if they do that, I think this team's going to be in pretty good shape this year. Certainly transcend whatever limited expectations the masses have for them. But that depends on the coaching, right? And I think that's the two things for me that are going to define what this season looks like is the coaching and the availability. And I don't look at this team and say, wow, they're totally devoid of talent. They can't win more than 7 games this year because they don't have talent. They can only beat bad teams. It depends on what the talent available, and it depends on what the coaching looks like. And those two variables for me right now are going to be the defining elements of whether this team is 7-10 or 8-9, or whether this team is 10-7 in 2025, with a very different optimistic feel if that happens. If they win 10 games this year, I would imagine there will be a lot of people that would be pleasantly surprised. I want to wait and see what the roster looks like before I decide for myself what I think it's going to look like. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins, and I'll talk to you all again tomorrow.